Greetings, I'm Alton Davis, and this is my week 2 assignment, video assignment. Um, this is for my discussion board, American Revolution 512, and I chose James Byrd's Sacred Scripture, Sacred War, the Bible and the American Revolution, and I chose Chapter 2, The Lord is a Man of War. Now in this book, James Byrd examines the influence of the Bible and the worldview of the American patriots during the American Revolution. Many patriots looked to the Bible for direction and inspiration in their fight against Great Britain. This book is the first comprehensive study of its kind to explore how the American colonists used biblical texts to justify the Revolution and inspire those who fought it. James Byrd in the Bible was a key text of the American Revolution. Indeed, many colonists saw the Bible as primarily as a book about war. Now in chapter 2, James Byrd brings the value of the colonists' metaphor for their actions against Britain and the biblical story of the Israelites' exodus from Egypt to focus. The mindset of the colonies was ripe for a providential concept of a population held in bondage by a tyrannical leader and then freed by divine intervention. The story of Moses and the Exodus was abundantly used in many ways to gain support for the revolution against Britain. And on a side note, I thought the Exodus thoughts about slavery did come to light during the Constitutional Convention, and ironically, the metaphor was not as popular when it came to the use of slaves in the colonies or in how they treated blacks. Now, this book is the first comprehensive study of its kind to explore how the colonists used biblical texts to justify the revolution and inspire those who fought it. They viewed God not as a merely sanctioning violence, but also actively participating in combat, playing a decisive role on the battlefield, for instance. When war came, preachers and patriots alike all turned to the scripture, not only for solace, but they used it to give them a reason to fight. Such scripture helped amateur soldiers overcome their natural aversions to killing and conferred on those who died for the revolution the halo of martyrdom. It also gave Americans a sense of divine providence in their cause. Many histories of the Revolution have noted the connection between religion and war, but Sacred Scripture, Sacred War is the first to provide a detailed analysis of biblical texts and how they were used, especially in the making of the case for the war. Now, Byrd combined more than 500 wartime sources, and that included more than 17,000 biblical citations. Byrd shows how the Bible shaped the American war and how the war in turn shaped the Americans' view of the Bible. Now, the Exodus is a story about the liberation from slavery. The dramatic statement from the Exodus 15 is, "The Lord is a man of war." This filled the colonial sermons because it proclaimed that God liberated his people through war. From the passage of the Stamped Act on, when colonists read the Exodus story, they associated it to their own experiences. The colonists believed that they were slaves being oppressed by British tyranny. And in opposition to tyranny, they preached the political message for the revolutionary gospel that equality was the mark of creation all people shared. The Exodus story was effective in the revolutionary America because it showed how God's wartime deliverances defied expectations against all odds. God defeated the Egyptians, just as it was appeared the Pharaoh's forces had the Israelites trapped on the coast of the Red Sea. Now, just as important as the goals of liberation, however, was God's means of liberation, a dramatic sense of divine violence. As clearly as any text in the scripture, Israel's deliverance at the Red Sea revealed God to be a warrior, and thus, the Lord is a man of war. Exodus 5:3. Now, the Exodus is a biblical narrative with almost universal political appeal. Nearly everywhere that bondage and injustice has existed, oppressed people have recalled the Exodus and claimed it as their own. The American Revolution, therefore, is but one episode in an ongoing saga. If Moses and the Exodus had remained prominent in America, the American Revolution is a major reason why. In this way, God delivered Israel, and He is God of America. This God delivered America. American preachers didn't fail to use or capitalize even on the use of the Bible in this Exodus story to rouse the colonists during this Revolutionary War. I like to talk about one minister in particular by the name of Elijah Fish. He was a minister in Massachusetts. He delivered a sermon after the British left Boston and complained that the British had aroused the Negroes to cut our throats and set the savages and Roman Catholics like bloodhounds on our backs. While they are like lions, they come to meet us with open mouths gaping for their prey, most ferociously and maliciously gnawing upon us with their teeth, filled with rage and indignation, threatening to devour us at a mouthful. The reason why I find that kind of interesting is it's almost like a fear of being enslaved by Britain is kind of what brought this all together for the colonists, and they used it in their sermons to get the colonists riled up. I thought it was a little bit hypocritical, a little bit of a hypocrisy that the American colonists were afraid to be enslaved and used the Exodus as their call for glory to go to war against Britain again, fight against their tyranny, because it was the will of God to set them free. And on the other side, they held their own slaves in captive. Now, even as they preached this message, the message of Exodus and how they were going to overcome Britain's tyranny, some of the founders and ministers acknowledged the grand hypocrisy of all of this, of the people complaining about slavery because the colonists enslaved thousands of Africans. This point was not lost on the British ministers either, as they made fun of the American patriots. John Wesley, for instance, is a founder of the Methodist movement, ridiculed American patriots. Complaints that the British had enslaved them with taxes, even as these same patriots held Africans in chains. Look on to America, Wesley wrote in 1775, and you will easily see the Negro fainting under the load, bleeding under the lash, while his minister is screaming, murder, slavery. So the American master complains loudly of slavery, while the slave silently bleeds and dies. The contradiction was so clear to some American patriots. Now, by the Americans making the Exodus story their own, especially by associating so strongly with the Republican ideals of liberty and the Republican institutions of the new nation, the Patriots set the parameters for later Americans, including 19th century slaves who saw the liberation of the Hebrews from Egypt as a model for their own struggles. After all, in calling America the New Egypt, slaves not only condemned slavery for an unjust institution, they also condemned the United States for not holding true to its revolutionary claim to resist the Pharaoh and his oppressive forms. Now, after the resolution, this grand contradiction between revolutionary ideals and slaveholding realities would, of course, become clearer than ever, and pose more challenges than many revolutionary era Americans could have imagined. Not surprisingly, the African Americans encountered the Bible. They often followed the revolutionary pattern of identifying the Exodus narrative. The crucial difference in this case, of course, is the perception that actual slavery in America, not the political oppression of revolutionaries that they complained about, was the true parallel to the Israelites' bondage in Egypt. African Americans reversed revolutionary America's reading of the Exodus, not as a mere metaphor for political oppression. It was a literal counterpart to slavery in America. This interpretation of the Exodus is widespread among slaves and abolishers of the 18th century. So with that, I would just like to bid you a good night and leave you with a little thought on the hypocrisy of slavery. That's the part I found most interesting in the book and in this chapter. And I am looking forward to checking out the rest of the book. Thank you and good night.